Hello. This is the second part of this story. If you haven't seen the first one, we recommend you watch it first. My car raced down the highway, dispersing the light snow that had fallen overnight, leaving a fast fading trail behind it. After about 30 kilometers, I turned off the highway onto a dirt road, and I ran into a solid wall of forest, which according to the map stretched for dozens of kilometers. The farther I drove, the narrower the road became. I slowed down and soon I was surrounded by a dense forest. For a while, the road went almost to the shore. The road turned sharply to the left and soon I was approaching a small, blackened by time, log house, standing on the very shore of the lake. A few apple trees were drowning in the mown weeds beside it. A high fence ran down to the water, from the side of the lake. I could see the pier on wooden stanchions driven into the water. I stopped the car, shut off the engine and got out looking curiously at my purchase. The air was filled with the smell of algae, damp, dust, and rotten rags. The house stared out at me through windows that reflected the crimson sun dipping behind the pine tops. The walls were made of treated pine logs. The roof is covered with slate. A small porch and a massive door padded with wrought iron. Wooden oars leaned against the wall next to it. A little further away, on low wooden piles stood a log barn, which appeared to have been used for storing firewood. Behind the barn by the water was a bathhouse. Climbing up to the low porch, I reached over the door and found a rusty key. Unscrewing the shackle, I carefully removed the lock and pulled the forged handle of the door toward me. I was expecting to see the inside of the cabin, a mess of cobwebs and abandoned things, but to my surprise, I saw a clean and fairly comfortable room. Only it was cold and smelled like mice. Almost in the middle of the room, there was a cast iron stove on a steel plate lined with wild stone. Wood was neatly stacked next to the stove. A nickel-plated iron bed stood by the far wall, tucked in with a protective colored wall blanket. Above the bed, hung a well-made wolf skin instead of a rug over which were nailed rhodea antlers. On them, on a wide tarpaulin belt, hung an old rifle. A table made of oak with carved legs stood by the window from which there was a fantastically beautiful view of the lake and the small pine-covered island at its very center. To the right of the front door was an antique cabinet. Sitting closest to the closet was an equally old refrigerator. On the opposite wall hung an old painting. To the left and right of the painting were an antique ship's clock and steering wheel. It looked as if the former owner might have had something to do with the Navy. I looked at the clock 5:45. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It had been an eventful day, and I had received my pension certificate that morning. And I felt quite happy. At lunchtime, I was left without a wife and a corner of my own. And in the evening, I found myself in the middle of the woods. But why in the middle of nowhere? It was less than 40 kilometers from the city. I pulled the car closer to the porch and started to carry my things into the house. It was rather cold in the house, so the first thing I did was to heat the stove. The first thing I did was to find a switch in the hallway and turn on the light. He flicked the switch and the light bulb under the ceiling came on briskly. The refrigerator rumbled like a well-fed cat. I laid out my things in the closet and stuffed my groceries in the fridge. It was darkening rapidly outside the windows. Twilight was falling. It was time to think about dinner. The electric stove was in the hallway. I decided not to bother. I opened a can of porridge and put it on the stove. 10 minutes later, dinner was ready, and I ate quickly, leaving the tea for later. While I was eating, it got dark. To occupy myself, I decided to rummage through the closet. On the bottom shelf, just under the hanger, there was a large tarpaulin bundle tied with twine. I carefully untied the twine, unwrapped the cloth and could not believe my eyes. A disassembled double-barreled shotgun. A 16 gauge, yeah. That was lucky. To my surprise, the gun was well oiled, but slightly affected by rust. Well, that would be something to do. I assembled the gun and put it in the corner. I opened the other drawers. In the right one, I found rags, gun oil, and to my great joy, ammunition. 20 of them in an unopened oil pack. I draped a top over the table and placed the gun on it. Frafted it and looked down the barrels. Took a metal can of gun oil out of the table drawer. I moved my stool so that the light fell on the table and began to clean my weapon. It seemed to me that the gun was even younger after cleaning. I opened the pack, loaded the gun with ammunition, and put the safety on. The phone rang again. The screen read "Sweetheart." I even shuddered. Before my eyes again appeared a disgusting scene of adultery, and the phone kept ringing. Finally, I decided to answer it. "Euro, what's going on? You are completely out of your mind at an old age." Sweeta's voice vibrated with anger. "Where are you? I told you to wait for me at home." I was silent. I did not want to talk. To her. "We need to talk. You're a grown man, the father of the family, and you act like a naughty child." So far my wife was still talking. "We have nothing to talk about. The situation is quite clear. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. If you want to see me, come to the courthouse at 11 o'clock. I spoke slowly, trying to control myself. "There, and we'll discuss all matters." Sweeter turned off the phone. Suddenly something crunched outside the window. The rain was drumming softly on the glass, but the sound was clearly audible. I looked out the window and saw an indistinct shadow flickering by the fence in the dim light from the window. My heart raced. Subconsciously, by some unknown instinct, I suddenly realized that there was someone in the yard. And this someone was now lurking in the tall weeds, watching me through the lighted window. I picked up my gun carefully, clicked the safety catch, and extinguished the light. Cautiously holding his gun at the ready, he looked out the window. Without dressing, I pushed the front door with my foot and stepped out onto the porch unobtrusively. "Who's there?" "Come out," I shouted and raised my rifle. "Don't shoot." A frightened voice answered from the darkness, and a woman in an overdressed and knitted cap of an incomprehensible color came into the light. "Who are you?" I was taken aback. "Leoyusha." "Who?" "Leoyusha, I live here, not far from here in the village. It's 5 kilometers from here." The woman spoke quickly. "It's just that Ivan was drunk today, so he kicked me out. He always swears and fights when he's drunk. I slept here a few times before, and now I thought the house was empty. It's strange. I didn't see any sign of a woman in the house. Don't you think so? I always clean up after myself, and I haven't touched a thing." The stranger seemed to read my mind. "If you'll excuse me, I have to go." The woman turned and walked into the darkness. For some reason, my heart ached. She is as lost as I am. "Wait for me," I shouted after the hunched-over figure in the rain. "Come inside, get warm." The woman stood for a while as if she hesitated, then turned around and went hesitantly to the porch. Without undressing, the woman sat down on the edge of a stool. The room was already hot. "Take off your coat. I'll hang it by the stove to dry." I held out my hand. She hesitantly took off her coat and hat. She wasn't old at all, about 45 years old. With unwashed hair and a bruise under her right eye. Ivan was a harsh man. The woman had a stale nightie under her coat. She must have jumped out in what she was wearing. Just her coat and hat. I looked at her feet. They were in a man's rubber boots 5 sizes larger. Lucia caught my gaze and tried to put her feet under the stool. "How often does Ivan bring you up in this way?" I asked him, hanging my coat on the back of the chair. "No. Once or twice a week." He's good, but when he drinks, he swears. The woman tried to cover the yellow bruises on her arms with the short sleeves of her. He shelters me, feeds me, clothes me. Well, he's a husband. I grind, remembering Sweeter. He is supposed to support his wife. We are not married, so we live. I help him with the household with the children. His wife died and now he has 3 children left. Liusha sighed. I sleep in the old banya. There's no room in the house. I only stay at home when he feels like it or when friends come over. She didn't finish and blushed. What morals? Ivan's not greedy either, sharing his woman with his friends. Why don't you get away from such a life? Where to? Who needs me? And I don't have a passport. Lucia was silent with her head down. It seemed to me that she silently cried. I took stewed meat out of the fridge and put the kettle on the stove. There was not much food. I did not count on guests, but it is better than nothing. I said, cutting bread. I thought about it and got vodka. Poured a little bit into a aluminum mug. Have a drink. Otherwise, you'll shake. You'll get sick. The woman took the mug and looked at me apprehensively. Drink, it's vodka. The guest ate and began to pack. I looked out the window. The rain had increased. The wind was rumbling over the lake, and even in the house. I could hear the waves crashing against the pier. All right. Stay here. Spend the night, and tomorrow you go to your Ivan. I turned to Lyasor. The weather's gone bad. You'll get lost again. The woman was looking in front of her, languishing in the warmth of food and vodka. It seems that Ivan did not spoil her much. I helped her to the bed. I laid her down and covered her with a blanket. I sat down in a chair in front